Hello and welcome to Creative Outcomes. I am your host, Ryan Watson, partner at Upsource Accounting, and today we have a really cool episode. I am joined by Danielle Foote, founder, partner, owner, all the above of Momentum. Momentum is a revenue generation consultancy, but I'll let Danielle go into all the details about Momentum. Danielle, welcome.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. All right, so tell people a little bit more. What's Momentum? What are you doing? Who are you working with?
Sure. So, Momentum is focused on business development and revenue generation for primarily creative agencies and marketing firms. Reason for that is solving the cobbler whose kids have no shoes problem that is so rampant in this industry. And creatives have so much value to share with the world, and yet they struggle so much with a lot of these business development, revenue generation, just general financial principles that you and I are going to get into a lot today. And so, Momentum's around to help consult, bring ideas, guidance, and structure to building out actual repeatable and scalable revenue generation systems.
I love it. By the way, I can't believe this, but that's the first time I think I've heard the cobbler whose kids have no shoes analogy. Took me a second. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's good. Okay.
It's a thing. It's a thing. Start asking your clients because they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's me.
I know. Yeah, like I've always said like, oh yeah, marketing agencies are some of the worst at marketing for themselves sometimes, and that's exactly what is meant by that analogy.
It's the perpetual identity crisis.
Mm.
They're like, "Oh, we can do all these things." And there's all these new technologies and ways of marketing available, and they're like, "Oh, like shiny object syndrome," and they go this direction, that direction, and they're like, "I don't know who we are, and I don't know what we do and why we do it."
That's exactly right. Though we've never let our clients do that, but of course for ourselves. Awesome. Okay, well, so let's get into it. I'm very excited. We have collaborated on a guide, and I think it's. I mean, hey, I'm not biased or anything, but I think it's pretty good. But the point of this thing is what we're calling it the agency growth roadmap, right? And it's kind of inspired by some of the things that we each talk about in different ways. We on our side call it sort of like the agency life cycle, but in general, just sort of like the journey of going from zero to whatever, infinite in terms of revenue and the various things that are gotchas, challenges, solutions, those sorts of things at each stage. And so that's what we're here to talk about. So I guess and just as a quick, and I guess I'll create the scaffolding and then we'll get into it. So overall, we have sort of each kind of segmented this agency growth roadmap into 4 stages. The first stage being creating the business, which is kind of that 0 to 1, both literally and figuratively 0 to 1, right? The second being the building the business stage, the third being the sort of growing the business stage, and the fourth being the scaling the business stage. So why don't we start at the top, the creating the business stage. Well, first of all, Danielle, how often, you gave me kind of the 2 types of agencies. How often do you find yourself working with these kinds of agencies? Is this a big part of what you do? Are you usually working with folks who are kind of exiting this stage? What's your exposure to these folks?
Most of the agencies that I'm working with are in the second stage. So they're working on building the business, getting usually from 1 to 3 million. I do have one client actively right now. They've grown from 3 to 5 in our work together, and they're growing from 5 to 10 over the next 5 years. So a lot of it is really what I love about the agency life cycle that you guys work through with your clients is that it aligns with everything that I see in the work that I do too. And so that's why we're like, oh my gosh, let's collaborate because there's a guide here.
Yeah, totally. Love it. Okay, so the creating the business, the create mode. Um, this is you're usually. What do you give me a sense for? Like, what are you seeing in agencies at this stage? How would you sort of typify this? What does it look like? Feel like?
Yeah. It feels chaotic, is how I would typify it, right? There's a lot of initial excitement, and one of the biggest caveats, though, that is kind of the yin yang of the excitement, but like danger zone, is this idea that I have this amazing thing that I want to do for people, and there's this. I'm going to call it naivety, to be completely blunt. in that a lot of creatives forget to actually look at where market demand is and identify an actual business strategy that's going to scale them into a business model that they can actually generate profit from over the long haul. So it's in the creating the business, like to me, that's the biggest potential failure point is not identifying market demand and building your business around actual market demand. So that's something that I talk about regularly with people that are starting a business, and I come in and lovingly just burst bubbles in a very hopefully kind way, mostly because it's so easy to just get caught up on the excitement train and forget about the other things and just think that it'll work out. But it's up to you to make it happen, right? It's not just going to magically work out. You have to put the guardrails, you've got to put the track in place to make sure that things are going to roll smoothly moving forward. What are you usually seeing, Ryan?
Well, some things that you say in your guide really resonated with me because they are kind of exactly what I see. And I think back to your point about sort of like the naivete of coming into the agency. Like if you put yourself in the shoes of a creative who starts their own business, like it's a very service first mindset. It's very much like I love the craft that I have devoted my life to. So I'm going to go and do that. And when I dream about what my agency is going to look like and I sort of think about putting pen to paper, it's all service related. It's all the like pixels or the code or whatever it is. And in the reality, as you described it, sort of demand first, it's a sales first exercise. Like we all get into this business thinking, oh, I'm going to do this craft that I love. When in reality, like 80% of it is actually going and generating, finding people who want to pay for your thing, not doing the thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I often, we don't spend a ton of time in this area. We do have some clients that are in create mode. We certainly talk to a lot of clients in create mode. And often the reason is because for the vast majority of these agencies should not be spending money on us. Like it's sales and service. Like it's you need to figure out why you exist. Like why should this agency exist across the sea of other agencies? And can you go prove that by finding people who will pay you for your thing? Do those things. And the reality, and I often say like there are very few mistakes that you could make in this phase that we can't fix on the other side of like $1 million and creating an agency that has a right to exist and has, is a going concern, if you will. And so, yeah, that's what I love so much about that your point, which is this is a sales and sort of market demand focused exercise. Do you so like I guess given that like how so if I'm an agency owner and I'm getting into this because I love the craft, like how do you coach them into kind of dropping that and like finding their thing, right? Like you kind of mentioned agency owners love to part of the cobbler and the kids shoes problem is like we love all these things and we have the shiny object syndrome. So how do you in this phase like how do you focus? How should you focus? How do you get out of it?
Yep. I actually have developed a niche picking workbook that also goes through like helping find market demand at the same time. So I work them through that process, and I don't really work with agencies in this stage either. Again, like you don't have the money to be spending on outside consulting and services at this point. You're focusing on selling, making sure that you're paid, making sure that your freelancers are paid, and so a lot of it is like self-guided. So I work them through that. It's available. I can make sure that your team has it to put in the show links. It's free, so you can work yourself through that. But the main point behind that entire exercise is really just to level set on the reality is you do have to develop something and sell it to a specific audience that has a specific problem, and make sure that even if the vehicle that you use to deliver services changes over time, because spoiler alert, it will, you have an audience that you can sell to that you're building trust with over time, and you're never losing that equity, even if you change the way that you service your clients. So, one thing too that I like to talk about a lot is forgetting about the fun stuff for a minute until you've sold something. And this freaks people out sometimes, but I really press in here because I do believe in funding your business entirely with cash. I don't believe in taking out a line of credit. And ideally, you're not funding it with your own cash as the owner, because to me, that is a line of credit. You're the creditor in that situation. Yeah, you're the bank. So ideally, you sell something that gets you some cash in the door, and then you build it as you go. It kind of makes me think of that scene in Mad Max, the movie where they're fixing the semi while they're driving. This is kind of what you're going to be doing in this stage, and you have to be okay with it because that is what successful businesses do.
Well, that's right. I mean, I can't remember why I had this conversation or who I had it with recently, but like, service businesses are very different than some other like capital intensive software like businesses, right?
Especially SaaS. Yeah, we can't, as agencies, we can't follow the SaaS playbook. It doesn't work for us.
Works, right? Like in SaaS, yeah, I'm going to invest a bunch of money up front to create an asset that I'm going to sell. And one of the advantages, the downside is it takes a bunch of upfront money. The advantage is you can sell it for many multiples of sales. The beauty of a service business is that it doesn't require that money. It doesn't sell for many multiples, but it produces cash immediately. And for that reason, you would be silly to go and dump a bunch of money into a professional service business because A, you don't have to, and B, you're not going to get the return that you would get from like a SaaS business. It's just not that kind of a model. And so lean into the thing that is so powerful and important about it, which is you can go and earn $1 tomorrow, like tomorrow. And so, but that's the way you have to build your business.
You don't need a website. You don't need all of this infrastructure. Like, you can start your business. I started my business without a website for years. I didn't have a website, and I got it cash flow positive from day one.
Yeah, no, I 1000%. Okay, so that's kind of look, that's 0 to 1, and it's hard. It's also I think the number one reason why people struggle to get through this phase is simply the points that you and I both made, which is it's what is required is actually not normally what people get into it for. Like again, it is a sales exercise far more than it is a delivery exercise. And a lot of people kind of realize, whoa, that's not what I thought I was signing up for, and ultimately don't choose to persevere through it. But for those that do, we often find that kind of first inflection point, and these are by very broad strokes, of course, right? But we find that first inflection point somewhere in the low seven figures. And so typify that. So what these are kind of clients that you do start to work with, I think, right? And so what does an agency who has kind of hit this inflection point look like, and how has the world changed for them and their needs changed?
Yep. So once you kind of hit that initial growing point, right? Some of the growing pains you're going to start to experience are challenges with using the same system that you delivered with when you're scaling it through other people that are going to be delivering that service for clients. And then you're going to start running into churn challenges, most likely, depending on the length of time that you've been in business. And then you're going to be navigating this kind of trade off between where you focus your time and the limited amount of resources that you have. Like, you have built a runway at this point, but you still have to make trade offs in where you spend. And so that can be one of the really challenging things. So, being decisive during this phase, I think, is hypercritical. You have to be decisive. You have to be okay with moving forward with something, not letting distractions get in the way. And you have to be able and willing to train up people to also lead within your organization. So that's kind of broad stroke. We'll get into it a little bit more. Talk about financial side. What are some of the stepping stones when you are building the business? I know this is kind of the main money zone that you work on with clients.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's this one and the next one, right? And they're very different. Like what they need is very different. And by the way, I totally agree. Like how you've described it is kind of similar to how we describe it, right? Like again, I often kind of describe because in at 0 to 1, like you're just your focus is on sales and demand generation, and then you're servicing it however you can, right? You're cobbling together freelancers and some of your own and some other folks. Like you're literally just trying to keep it together until you have a size where you can actually make some better decisions. And so I often describe owners who get to this stage as having built or owned a job and not necessarily a business, right? So much of the thing kind of
For
relies on
27
them.
jobs.
Exactly, 27 jobs, right? So like it's nothing, it's just it hinges, it's this it's put together with shoestring and bubble gum. But that's okay. Like that's okay. We can build the foundation. That's like your Mad Max analogy. That's okay. We can fix this thing while we're driving it. But ultimately, it relies on delegating away some number of those 27 hats and creating what starts at build mode as a totally unprofitable, like you and an economically upside down kind of a thing, start to sort of like the way that we work with these build mode clients is that we start to kind of surgically move through what we describe as the hierarchy of financial needs to focus on, prioritize, solve each element of priority and kind of like each element of profitability, rather, each element of profitability in kind of a linear fashion. And so, yeah, that's the whole thing. I'll say kind of some of the things. I don't have to go all the way into the details. If anything pops out that's interesting, I can go into it. But we describe like our focus in this phase, as I described, is the hierarchy of financial needs. And again, like the hierarchy of financial needs is it's really in response to, we had a lot of like build mode clients who would come to us like in this phase and saying, okay, I'm not profitable. But I exist now and I should exist. What should I focus on? What are the KPIs that matter to me? Right. And then, what's available to them is like, here's the 27 KPIs you should manage for your creative agency, or here's the whatever, here's the dashboard you should look at. The problem is if I'm a new, I just eclipsed the 1 million or $1.5 million mark, and I go through that and I put up my dashboard of those 27 KPIs, what I'm going to find is a sea of red. It's just all going to look bad. And I'm going to look at that and be like, what do I do? Oh my gosh, this business stinks. And then you're going to put your head in the sand and just be like, you know what? Screw it all. Like, I'm not going to look at any of this stuff because what am I supposed to do? How can I possibly live with this like crushing? And so like psychologically, that doesn't do you any good. Even just pragmatically, like, okay, well, what should I focus on? And so I don't believe that that's the right approach because I believe that at any given stage, there's probably just like one or two things that really matter, in part because you can't focus on multiple things, in part because some are more important than others, and in part because these are not that 27 metrics or whatever. Those are not independent metrics. It's not as if they're all mutually exclusive. You fix one, you fix a bunch of others. And so like the point is, so we went through the exercise saying, okay, well, let's just organize this in like a sequential set of steps where we can work our way through. The way we describe them is like solvencies at the bottom. That's like, can I make payroll? Once I solve that, then I move to gross margin, which is the most important part of the business. That's like, am I making money on the core thing I do? Forget about overhead and all that other stuff. Just like revenue minus the cost to deliver the revenue. Am I there? Am I not? If I'm not there, nothing else matters. If I am there, I can be successful. And then once I've solved that, which is definitely like, that's the linchpin for sure. Once I've solved that, it's actually kind of smooth sailing. Then I just keep doing that until I get cash reserves that allow me to sort of like sustain the ups and downs. Once I do that, now I can actually become net profit positive and actually put a bunch of money in my pocket, hopefully 20% or more. And then beyond that, we actually get to the capstone, which is where you live, which is repeatable revenue generation. That's where we say like, look, this is where we focus on building a system and not just, the incidental revenue that comes from word of mouth and organic and referrals and things that I can't control.
Trying to get away from that feeling of paycheck to paycheck in your business and actually moving to something that you can forecast way better and actually plan for. And I think one of the biggest components that maybe it's forgotten or maybe it's just backburnered. You can pick. Maybe it's different for every business. But I think a lot of it is this understanding that you have to be continually building your audience, building strategic relationships, building your profit, and building leaders in your agency. That's the momentum framework that I work with clients on, is focusing on those four components, because when you're building the right audience, no matter what you're servicing with and how you're going to market, you have a bunch of people that you've built trust with that are willing to at least consider buying something from you, as long as it serves a need that they have. And when you build strategic relationships, you're building out that system whereby you can, over time, get that repeatable revenue. And it starts, 5 years before you need it, right? So you have to start that early and just be okay with building that long-term runway. Building profit, I think the biggest thing in this phase, when you're building the business, you've kind of overcome that 1 million mark, you're trying to scale up to about 3 million. You really do have to focus on profitability at a per client and per project basis,
Right.
and
Totally.
make sure
That's
that,
our gross margin number. Yep.
yeah, make sure that
Yep.
everything is dialed in on clients. And so one of the biggest things there, like, you have got to track your time on clients, not because you're doing billable hours. I do not advise that for most agencies, but so that you can see where are your resources going, because there are a lot of agencies that are actually paying to have clients, and they just don't realize it. They don't realize it. And you don't know until you actually put in the effort and the discipline to track everything.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, we could spend 30 minutes talking about this topic alone, but it is still pretty shocking to me. And you're totally right, which is there's a lot of like there's this broader kind of philosophical dialogue about the billable hour and blah blah blah, and so that kind of gets sort of lumped in with and kill time tracking. It's like no no no, you're conflating two topics, right? Nobody's suggesting that you have to go time and materials. I'm a big proponent of value pricing if you can do it. But that does not absolve you from understanding, did my value price make money? Like, did I actually earn, was this worth doing or not? It's still crazy to me how many agencies are resistant to it. But I can tell you, and we can talk a little bit more in like the next stage. Very few. I can think of one client. We work with about 115. I can think of one client who has gotten out of the build stage without tracking time. Just one. Others, like serious agencies, track time. Full stop. The only, and this agency, and look, I think you can't, if you sell, and this isn't that common, like most creative agencies sell a heterogeneous product. Like there's a lot of customization, even if it's like, I have this offering, there's so many shades of gray in how I deliver. Yeah, so personalized. If you truly are totally productized, like it's homogenous, high volume of homogenous, then you can probably get by with like some anecdotal data that helps you get a sense for, is this profitable? Is this not? I don't advise it, but this is what they have been able to do. And I can see how that works because it is just so standardized. But that is not how most agencies work. There's just so much variability in the delivery of these things. And how can you possibly know? And by the way, your gut is usually, I shouldn't say usually, it's often wrong. Like some of the things that you think are your best, most profitable clients aren't. They're not. They're just the ones that you have more line of sight to, perhaps.
And sometimes it's not even about the client. Sometimes it's about the person managing the account. Sometimes the people that you think are the best account managers are actually so over delivering that they are costing your agency revenue and dollar signs.
Let me ask you one more question, and then we'll go to that next phase. So because this is definitely, I mean, look, I can tell you that my build mode clients struggle with the concept of like RevGen, no question, right? Like this is the skill to really, because it is like what you're doing in this stage is a little bit different than what you're doing in the earlier stage. That might have been very hand to hand and very non-scalable, and now we have to create like a sustainable way to generate revenue. And there, you mentioned kind of your four sort of pillars, and there's elements of that are, I think you can correct me where I say something wrong, but I think there's elements of that are sort of marketing focused, like building my audience, and there are elements of that I suspect are probably a little bit more sales focused that might have a quicker payback period, if you will. How do you normally, like, so if I have nothing, how do you normally suggest that a person at this stage starts, knowing that, like, as you mentioned, a lot of the things that I'm going to do in a marketing context aren't going to pay dividends for many years. So how do I balance the, like, I can't afford to invest so far into the future because I just need to live for now. But also at some point, I'm going to have to do it. Like, how do you solve that problem? Or,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. This is a really great question, and we might need to unpack it for a few minutes longer
go
than
for it.
hoped
Let's go.
for, but we will get into the next phase. So,
Yeah,
um, I'm going to challenge a typical belief that people have that marketing and sales are entirely separate and
do it.
distinct
Yeah.
functions, especially in an agency space. They're not. I
Okay.
advocate for lead generation as a team sport to be infused into your agency. And this should start day one. If it doesn't start day one, you can infuse it in over time, but especially as you're building the business and then,
Yeah.
next stage growing the business. Like you have to have this in the mindset, in the culture of your team, whereby it's not just you, the owner, that's generating new deals,
Yep.
new revenue. It's every single person on the team has a part to play. So there's different ways to go about
Yep.
that. You
Yep.
want to
Yep.
leverage the superpowers of different people. But the other component to that mindset that needs to shift for a lot of agencies is that marketing really is, it's pre-sales. Marketing
Yep.
should be supporting sales. And I know marketers don't want to hear that. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's detrimental to our little
Uh-huh.
egos,
Yep.
but
Yep. Yep.
it's true, and that's how you
Yep.
become actually successful as a marketing person or marketing department. You should be doing this for your clients too if you're a marketing agency, but that's a
Totally.
whole another conversation. The
Yeah.
point
Yeah.
is you need to shift your mindset towards marketing is supporting sales. So the activities that marketing are doing, if they're not going to support getting a sales conversation in the
Yeah.
door, it's not worth doing. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of the primary things to start with, if you don't know what to start with, it needs to be relationship building based value. So you can do like guide based downloadables, but you should be going to market with that through relationships. So get
Yep.
into communities, have your niche defined, really be talking with people. I advocate that 4 to 6 hours of your week should be spent talking with people in your industry. They might not be clients, but they can be people that would
Yeah.
know good clients for you. So you really want to start developing those relationships, building value in the industry, actually having a stance on something that's
Yeah.
interesting to people. That's one
Yeah.
of the biggest differentiators for really successful service providers is they actually take a stance and they hold to it. They have something
Mhm.
interesting and unique to share. Market research is a great way to position your agency among a vertical with insights. And you can even use that to generate new conversations with people if you're using
Yep.
them to field your site. Like there's a lot of different things that you can do. But
Yep.
suffice it to say, like you have to be willing to talk with people. Like businesses
Totally.
are built
Yeah.
on
Yeah. Yeah.
on relationships.
Totally. And and then the last thing I'll say, and we'll move on to the next one, is like you're totally right that these, the right way to think about these two is that they are in support of one another. And even like this, like in our experience and with our clients, we often find that while marketing can sometimes, like the marketing activity can sometimes be a top of funnel activity. I see the guide, I have a conversation. It can also be a conversion rate opportunity too. I talk to a person, I give them the guide.
Uh-huh.
And so anyway,
It's more of a spider web. Like it's not linear. And we have to be okay with that. Yeah.
okay, so okay, we got build mode and then generally we from our experience, let me tell you how we see it, and then you tell me if this experience sounds right to you or not. Often when we're working with clients, we're moving our way through the kind of hierarchy of financial needs. The capstone is the stuff that we just talked about. Not to say that only happens at the end, but it's kind of a prerequisite. And I really believe this. And I've also, as I said, very few agencies get to grow mode without tracking time. I don't think I've seen anybody get to grow mode without having repeatable revenue generation. Like just getting there incidentally with word of mouth and organic and referrals and no other activities. I have yet to see that. So that's kind of becomes the capstone. By the time that you've got all these pieces in place, it starts to feel kind of easy. Like it starts to feel good and like this is inevitable and I figured this thing out. And then eventually it stops feeling that way. Yeah, like the wheels fall off. It's like, wait a minute, I thought I had this thing totally locked. And we see things like just employee tensions kind of arise and clients churn and, just like what is happening. And there's a lot of things that that cause that. You may have some perspective. I think one of the causes is simply that the operating model that you generated in build mode has has is not appropriate. It's too small for the size of your agency, right? Like you've outgrown it, and usually it's because you have this like somewhat centralized decision making team, whatever it is. Yeah, too many bottlenecks. Now these decisions are like several layers removed, and people are feeling the tension. They're lacking the autonomy. They're confused. They want more representation and leadership and all that kind of stuff. And so it just kind of manifests. It sounds like, is that accurate to how you?
Totally. And at this point, you're also bringing in new team members to the existing core team. So you're creating new cultural dynamics and
Family, the OGs, they're not the only people anymore.
right. So you have these like organizational psychology dynamics that start to come into play and most business owners aren't thinking about that. They're just thinking about the dollars on the spreadsheet that they want to
Yeah.
chase after.
Yeah.
And so they haven't even built they've not built anything to alert them of issues and challenges. And
Yep.
so they only realize that there's a dumpster fire happening when they see the smoke and the
When the
flames.
yeah, exactly. When the flames are, yep. And there's been embers for a little while, but yeah.
Exactly. So a lot too that I see here, and again, I focus more on the RevGen side than the operations side, but from a RevGen side and standpoint, a lot of it too starts to fall apart and the wheels fall off the tracks because the owner realizes like I am spread so much more thin. I already felt like I was spread thin. I thought that I could hire someone and help with this, that, and the other thing, and it didn't work out, or I feel like I'm having to hold their hand too much, or I'm not willing to give up control as much as I need to. And some of those things create those limiting situations that have to then be overcome. And that's a lot of like, honestly, like owner development and leadership development and some of those skills and putting that into practice. I would say if you can start putting those into practice sooner before you need them at scale, you are going to love what your past self did for you so much.
Yep. Yeah, so I and by the way, are you thinking at this phase, and I should say I don't think I said it. We often typify like the grow mode as having like 3 million. So like that 1 to 3 is kind of like the building your agency, and then on the other side of 3, this is when things start to break, and this is when you're kind of in the growing phase. Is this when you are typically seeing like the teams from the RevGen side like professionalizing the organization? Is this when you're seeing like bringing in outside folks that have sales quotas and things like that? Or have you already done this at this point? Like,
Really depends. It really depends on the agency. And as a general rule, I actually advise most agencies to identify existing team members that would be good for sales as opposed to hiring outside. I have seen outside sales hires fail far more often, and they have a very long time to value. So, if you look at the people in your team and who would be a good fit, a lot of times they're existing project managers and account managers that can be trained into the sales aspects. And a project manager and account manager is easier to hire from the outside and train into your processes than a just straight on salesperson. So that's one conversation that I'm usually having with people. The other conversation I'm usually having with people is event based and either going to events, speaking at events, or hosting your own event and being the facilitator of those things. And then focusing on account based marketing. So, up to this stage, you're mostly leveraging relationship marketing and inbound marketing. This third pillar, account based marketing, is where you're saying, like, oh, I have identified this company that I want to be a client. Here's our plan. Here's how we're going to woo them to become a client of ours. And here's what we're going to do to earn their business. And you have to do that with your existing clients as well. Like you have to continue to woo them. You have to continue to earn their business. That's what a good client experience is all about. But there's just so many more factors than just putting out marketing materials at this point.
yeah, totally. Well, so that latter point about your customers, your existing customers, I find myself surprised by how few agencies have like formalized the account function from a account planning standpoint. Like these existing clients, this is what I expect from them, and these are the activities I'm going to take beyond just like being here and doing the work to ensure that I retain and grow that revenue base. And boy, is that much easier. You can't build a That's another thing. You can't build a successful agency if you're not doing that. If you don't have good planning and good account management that is revenue focused, and your revenue is literally just like new logos and whatever incidental retention, like that's also another clear ceiling. The other thing you said on the rev side that is really consistent on the ops side is this idea of like bringing up your existing folks into new levels, right? So on the ops side, we often find all those things, the processes breaking because of the sort of bottlenecks that exist in this centralized sort of leadership. And so the solution to an agency that's getting bigger is to make it smaller. And what I mean by making it smaller is divide it into small chunks. Sometimes it's very obvious. Like if you have clear revenue streams, like we have an SEO practice and we have a whatever, great, awesome. You have folks who run that. Sometimes that's not as obvious. And we see agencies take more of a portfolio approach. This group of clients is this, and this group of clients is a pod. Exactly. Pod structure. We do a pod structure at Upsource, but it doesn't matter. There's no right answer. But then you have deputies. These are people who now are accountable, they're incentivized, and they are driven to own their individual metrics, their individual groups that ladder up to the org level metrics and the org level priorities.
They have to be empowered to be observant and be willing to bring stuff up and know that they'll be supported and not reprimanded.
Well, and on top of that, like I'd say the biggest area of failure we see with regard to appointing deputies is both like giving them again the autonomy and giving them the accountability, but also just like we often see, hey, you own this pod and you own this pod, and then we just all go back to operating as we used to. It's like, well, what does it even mean to own this pod? Like, or even, you may see people take a step further and you own gross margin for your pod and you own gross margin for your pod. And then we never talk about gross margin for your pod. And so it's like, wait a minute. And so then like your behavior undermines your words. And people realize that even though in name we have a new operating model, in practice we have the same operating model. And so you cannot have success with this new structure without implementing a feedback loop for that new structure.
And part of that feedback loop is actually having a place for clients to go that is not their direct point of contact where they can bring stuff up. Because if they only have one point of contact at your agency, if there's upsell opportunities, they might not get heard about if the person managing them is not looking for them and having the right conversations. The other side too is if there's problems, again, going back to the dumpster fire situation, like you're not going to know until the client's like, oh, we're canceling and we're never coming back and we're leaving you a horrible review and we're so upset. We want a refund and like everything's on fire. Yeah.
Back up. Totally. Yeah, totally. And so another element of this is we often implement the monthly business review, could be quarterly, whatever, but it's a place to bring those deputies together for us to talk about like these are the individual metrics that we're holding these teams. By the way, this is how they ladder up to what, the organization. And also let's just talk about, okay, last month, how did it go? And not from a punitive standpoint. Hey, Sally, you messed up here, and hey, Trisha, you did a great. It's not like that. It's just here's what we said we wanted to do. Where did we land? And then what do we want to do different next month? Like how are we going to sort of chip away at this thing? And then let's get together again. Let's see, did we have any progress? And let's talk about what we're going to do different next month. And if you create that sort of feedback loop, and by the way, client delight and NPS scores and all those kinds of things are components of that, then you're sort of reinforcing the things that matter, and you're providing space for these people to take the autonomy to make changes and to get recognized for how those are going. And by the way, also share among the deputies. This deputy is trying this thing. Oh crap! I want to try that too. And the beautiful thing is when the leadership kind of melts away and the teams are just working with one another and they're solving their own problems together. That's the sort of nirvana that you're going to.
I'm so glad you brought that up because at this stage, especially the silos that just kind of got built naturally while you were building the business. Like, if you do not either build bridges or break down the silos, period, you're going to continue running into problems. And that's where you get your bottleneck issues.
Totally. And so if you can solve those problems, then you That is kind of your unlock to get to the last stage, which is the scaling the business, which I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on scaling because the reality, there is no way to typify scaling, right? Ultimately, it's a very conscious decision. Many agencies get into this space with no desire to run a really large organization of people. And so getting to 10 million or above is just not on the roadmap. But for some, it is. And the choice is the different ways that you can pursue that path, either through inorganic growth, like acquiring other agencies, organic growth, are varied. And so there's really no like standard operating model and standard sort of way of thinking about it, other than to say this exists. This is when it gets a little bit more difficult for a different reason. This is also when outside PE firms and financial buyers start to get quite interested. And you're gonna need to reinvent your operating model again. So that's the whole. There it is. That's the guide. That's the path. It's true. It's just that simple. You do the things, and then you're 10 million, right? Like we figured it out. Yeah.
One step at a time, or I also like to say you eat the elephant one bite at a time. And Ryan has some really great, in his part of the guide, some really great checklist items. I have a few checklist items for consideration. So if you download the guide, totally free to you, download the guide, think through it, talk about it with your teams, talk about it with people that you want to become deputies as well, and start to hear their ideas and start bringing some of this to life.
Love it. Well, Danielle, this has been a lot of fun. It's been fun creating this. It's been fun talking to you. Obviously, you're watching this probably right next to the guide. If you're on YouTube, you'll see it in the comments and the show notes. So that's number one. Danielle, outside, if they watch this, read the guide, and are like, I really want to get in touch with Danielle, how else should they find you?
LinkedIn's a great place to find me. You can also, if you're seeing this on my website, you can use the calendar link and just schedule some time. Love to just have some coffee with you over a Zoom. And if you're on YouTube, just follow some links and we'll make sure you can get to the right place.
Awesome. All right. Until next time, thanks for joining. See you later.